I'm joined today by fran.saele, who has been in corporate and commercial real estate development. I think you sold a business to CBRE, right?
That's right.
So whole career around commercial real estate, now kind of workplace, and currently Francis is the managing partner of Mortevita. Francis has great insights on LinkedIn about hybrid work, changing workplace policies, or the state of office space. That's how I found Francis. So I'm excited to have a discussion here today with you, Francis. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Henry. Great to be with you.
So let's start here. I can do the very basics, and then I need you to add some nuance. Most people worked in the office. Then 2020 hit, and most people worked from home. I'm talking about knowledge work, desk jobs, right?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I was going to qualify that because most people actually don't work in offices, but a large chunk of them do.
Yes, it's a good distinction. So let's say most people worked in an office who have a desk job. Then most people were forced to work from home. Where are we now, or where have we been the last few years? Like what is happening now?
Well, it's almost like a blur in my mind because it's really years ago now, but it seemed to just evolve slowly over time. I think to answer the question, I think we're in a period of reassessment and restructure, and there are some who maintain a desire to return to what was in the past. I like to call that RTO, return to office, but that's also return to the past, RTP. So there is that ongoing conflict, and that will continue to exist, I think, to some extent for several years. And I just saw an article, which I also posted today, which talks about UPS, the global shipping company, where about 500,000 people employed globally, and 85,000 of those, mostly in the U.S., are knowledge workers. UPS has decided now that they want everybody back in the office 5 days a week. I mean, that's pretty much unheard of. But there's a big company going for it. The real question is, where are they going to go with that? And is that going to be successful, or is it going to be ultimately detrimental to where UPS is going? And I talk about that in the post if anybody wants to see it. But.
So I track the Fortune 100. Maybe this is how we connected. I try to track all their return to office policies and keep them up to date monthly. I can't remember if UPS is in there or not. I think they are. But it's only like maybe 7 or 8 of the 100 that want people in 5 days a week. Whether they're actually getting that done or not, I don't know. But it's like 7 or 8% of the massive companies. You've seen the statistics, like only 4% of CEOs will be focusing on a full return to office this year. So it's some, like you said, small amount that want the 5 days a week. Then it's also a small amount that want the fully remote. I've found about 2 of the 100 Fortune 100 would say they're like remote first or really leaning into it, which leaves everyone else in the middle, like the hybrid thing. So paint us a picture of hybrid work. Like what are some common policies? What are managers trying to get done in like hours, days in the office? And what do you think employees want? What's going on with the hybrid piece? Because that explains most of the companies right now.
Okay, happy to do that, but let me just spend a minute or two on the two extremes.
Sure.
The first being the return to the office extreme, and I think the percentage that you have there is probably about right. Most organizations have kind of given up on Friday as a day in the office. It's become a 3-day weekend for everybody, pretty much. Although some people do actually work on Fridays, but they work remotely. As we talked about just a minute ago, there is this yin yang about where ultimately organizations should go. At the other end of the spectrum are the remote, totally remote companies, and there are just a few percentage wise. And those are organizations, most of which were created post pandemic or were primarily remote and just went all the way because it was simple for them to do. They don't have any real estate. If they need real estate for a meeting or something, they just get it and have it short term. So they're on the other end of the spectrum. They tend, I think, to be, generally speaking,
Hmm.
smaller. They tend to be newer,
Yep.
and it's certainly a plus. Having been through starting up a business, I would have liked to have done that without paying anybody
Yeah.
rent,
Yes.
which becomes a big share of your early income. And so I think we see that's where the bulk of those organizations are. Some will continue to evolve in a fully remote fashion, though, and some large organizations may come into that arena as well. But everybody else is in the middle, and we call that, or the industry calls that, hybrid. And hybrid really has no clear definition in terms of what that
Yeah.
means. Um, but basically, it's where employees are spending part of their time in a structured office, doing something with other people, generally in the office, and other parts of their time is spent remotely. A lot of that is done at
Yep.
home, but it could be remotely small groups. It could be Starbucks at noon for a couple hours. It could be anything really that's not inside of an office structure per se. And that's the type of work where most organizations have felt comfortable. It was kind of middle ground for many between everybody coming back and everybody staying away. It provided some benefits to both camps, so to speak, and it is working for many organizations. And we have begun to see some of the objective data that's been done on things like revenue
Yeah.
growth, people growth, um, uh, productivity, and certainly on the employee um, uh, experience side of the equation, most employees do feel much more comfortable in a hybrid or remote
Yep.
environment. So you catch a lot of boxes when you're in the hybrid designation, and you have a lot of flexibility going forward. And there's some attributes about that also connect into the office side of the equation that we could talk about.
Yeah. Which does bring us to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, because if everyone, almost every company, needed almost all employees in the office almost all the time before 2020,
Right,
now we're in just like, it's been the structure's been thrown into the air. So hybrid, remote, people.
right.
So you brought up a term called the big shrink, which would be the next logical thing. Like, what does that mean? Let's talk about the big shrink.
Right. Well, it came to my mind that as and this the decisions about what organizations are doing. It used to be a kind of a corporate real estate decision within organizations. They would assess how much they were growing, um, and leases would come up for renewal, and they would say, "Well, we have 1,000 square feet here. I think maybe we should get
Yeah.
1,200 feet, and that'll probably be good for the next 3 or 4
Okay.
years. So we'll get 1,200 feet." It was a simple expansion of work, and office buildings in the United States and everywhere really grew from and over the last 100 years from a relatively small number to a very large number. Now in the U.S. alone, it's about 4.5 billion square feet of
Wow.
space. So that's a lot of office space. But going back to your question, today when spaces are coming up for renewal or leases coming due in the next maybe 12, 18 months, the question is asked, well, what are we going to do with this particular space? And it isn't necessarily the headquarters of the organization. It could be some business unit that's working in Cleveland, and they have 10,000 square feet or something
Yeah.
like that. There, I think what we're seeing, generally speaking, in the market is that there are two things that have changed. Organizations are evaluating the use of that property with much more scrutiny in terms of how it's being used and how often it's being used. And when they make the decision to do something different, they either leave the space or stay in the space, but they reduce the amount of square footage
Yep.
that they had compared to what they had before. And that's because they don't need it
Yeah.
anymore. They just don't need the levels of space because they're never getting everybody in there at the same time. So you would think that at least half of that space is probably vulnerable for, dismissal within the organization. The other thing that is happening with those leases is those leases, from an office building owner perspective, you always want the lease to be as long as possible. And certainly for very large leases, that was generally the
Hmm.
case. 10, 15, 20 years was not uncommon. Um, the term of lease renewals, even smaller segments of space, it went from 3 to 5 years, let's say, for an organization that was, maybe 10, 20,000 square feet, down to 1, 2, or 3. And maybe it's 2 years with an option to terminate after 18 months or something. And the reason for that is, well, there are two reasons for that. One, organizations really didn't know that they had their act together after just a year and a half into the pandemic. They wanted to be flexible to do something different. And what if some new approach to distributed work came about that everybody loved and they were going to move toward it? You don't know whether you're going to need that space anymore. Organizations really don't want to be trapped anymore with thousands of square feet of space that they're not using and they can't sublease. So there's been that shrinkage of the space, and the commitment to the space in terms of time has also shrunk quite a bit. And actually, on the ownership side, that really makes it difficult for landlords to do business, frankly, because obtaining money for loans on buildings requires that there be some projection of cash flow. And if you have a WeWork tenant, for half the building, you have no idea whether that revenue is going to be there or not. And as WeWork landlords found out, it died. So those are the two big changes on the real estate side that are still continuing to evolve.
Yeah. So if the big shrink is essentially meaning that office space has less demand, and it's harder for the occupants to determine into the future how much space they'll need. If that's been totally thrown up in the air, those two things that used to be sort of predictable, what's that doing to the value of office space in the US or in certain cities? Like, how are valuations looking these days?
Well, there is some objective data about that, and that you can use the office REIT valuation index, and there are several office REITs. REITs are organizations that invest in office buildings as their asset, and basically that's what they have as office buildings as their assets. The valuation of office REITs declined about 70% in the period of less than a year, I believe. I don't have that data right in front of me, but it was a huge drop. In terms of direct sales, those kind of went on ice for a couple of years. Those have begun to happen, but most of those sales are at significant discounts to prior valuation, to the tune of 50 to 75%. Wow. I mean, we've seen some of those transactions happen. So the valuation is very much up in the air. It also means that the whole concept of flex space from a occupier's perspective becomes much more attractive, because if I can be flexible on my commitment for space, if it can be 6 months or 2 months or a week, that's very attractive to me as a tenant. But it creates more time and energy to manage that process, because you don't want to be out in the cold. So you've got that combination of flex becoming more popular on the tenant side, not very popular from the ownership side, because again, you're talking with relatively short leases. Financing entities are not interested in short leases; they only want longer leases. So it creates this conundrum.
So the big shrink is happening to like this batch or this 5 or 10 year periods lease renewals, right? So everyone's saying I need less space than I need before, and they're renewing at shorter terms too. So I'm curious to know what you think when all those companies renew again. What do you think will happen on the second time? Do you think we've reached a status quo here for a while, or do you think it keeps going down? Do you think they shrink again in 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think it really depends on the organization, because some organizations will shrink differently than others, and some will actually grow. It's just not determined yet. We're not enough far into it to know which organizations are going to need more space or which organizations are going to need less. I would say on average, at least in this early period in the transformation of office, we're going to see a continual shrink for several years. And my sense is that what will be happening, which is totally different than has ever happened in the past. In the past, you usually would have um, space growth. You would be building space, and you would have absorption, is called, where new leases or leases grow, and the amount of space leased continues to increase year over year.
Hmm.
Um, and the supply of buildings changes over that period as well. So you'll see more or less vacancy based on how many buildings are built. Now, I think you're going to see just the opposite. You're going to see continual shrinkage in use of office buildings, particularly in the central business districts of big cities
Yeah.
around the
Yeah.
country. And there are some exceptions there. If you look at New York City is a very big city, but if you look at Manhattan, really, is there a downtown? Yes, there's a downtown lower
Hmm.
Manhattan, but there's also Midtown. There's also several other major business districts within the island. So it's hard to say that there's a CBD there at all. It's a,
Yep.
it's a big island. But for most cities, the CBDs were located in a central place, easy for many people to get to from anywhere, but they also have the longest commute as well.
Mhm.
And my sense is that, the commute being the biggest negative factor associated with returning to the office and office work, that you'll continue to see CBDs shrinking beyond where they shrink elsewhere.
Mhm.
And at the same time, and now we're talking 5-10 years from now, that there will be a need for office space and more office space, but it's not going to be in the CBDs because you already got too much
Yeah.
there. It's going to be in these distributed nodes, really suburban areas or other places where people will be living nearby, retail will be nearby, and there will be this office space where people can go and collaborate and do other things that they do in
Yeah.
offices. So there will be growth there, but it won't be, I don't think, in the
I'm trying
CBDs.
to think through that in my head because the way you frame that's interesting. When we were just talking about Southern California, I feel like there are
Mhm.
no central business districts in Southern California. San Diego, nobody works in the downtown. I actually,
But does anybody actually work in Los Angeles?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a
I
good
mean,
point.
it's all play
Yeah,
there,
exactly,
You go to the beach, right?
exactly. But like I moved from Boston. I'm from Massachusetts, and that's a very traditional city, central
Right,
business district. Everyone commutes in from the suburbs, the train, car,
right.
boat. And then I moved to,
Hour and a half is not
yes,
uncommon. I would,
yeah. But then I moved to San Diego, and I actually ended up working downtown, and it was a complete reverse commute. I was driving into the city with nobody on the road, and everyone's on the other side of
interesting.
the road because because it's like a younger city, right? So all
Right,
these office parks are up the five, and they're all
right,
between here and Orange County, and they're huge ones. And there's
right.
a huge commute going away from the city to the big
That's
ones. And
interesting.
so I wonder, I don't think, because those commutes were still terrible, because I worked in one of those out here too, and those took 45
Oh,
minutes to go 8 miles or something.
right,
Um,
right.
I bet those are gonna, like those office parks are gonna be hurting too, um, big time. So when you say maybe it moves away from the central business district, I don't envision it as more office parks. How do you envision that like playing out? What kind of spaces would they be? Do you think?
Well, yeah, yeah, I mean, a place like San Diego may be the exception to the
Mm,
rule, and other places in California. But historically, I think most
mhm.
CBDs in the Midwest, certainly, and in the Southeast and Northeast,
Yeah,
had most of the concentration of office space, but they had very little residential. San Diego is just the
yeah,
reverse of that now,
yeah,
I think, in terms of a city. You see in San Francisco, for example, where you have a great deal of office space in the
yep,
downtown, but and hotels and entertainment things, but very little
mhm,
housing. Um, Now that's going to change over time. I think
yeah,
you'll see, because of the attraction of downtown as a place to be in San Francisco, you're going to see more residential move in, but still you're going to have plenty of office space to deal with that. Where you won't have office, where it will be needed to be conveniently located, is in suburban
yeah,
areas, probably in San
yeah,
Francisco. You've already got that there, so you're going to have. And I'm sure, and I know, having been there several times recently, that suburban areas in San Diego are still very
mhm,
attractive, and they do have maybe older, more mature residents, families, that kind of
yeah,
thing. As those continue to emerge, those are going to be attractive places for people to live, and they're going to want to have their whatever office element is involved in their lives, whether it's very small or larger, they'll want that to be closer. They don't want to sit on the 5 for an hour and a
Yeah.
half each way.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, I think you're right. And that's the main thing. Like I've run a remote company. The name of my company is Build Remote. So obviously, where my bias is. But the main thing is just not commuting an hour or more each way to bring
Right.
your laptop, which is what the world of work is now. You're bringing your laptop. So you're doing it there or here. And so there's benefits to in-person collaboration, of course, but the main thing that people I think don't want is the commute. Is that how would you agree
Correct.
with that?
That's definitely
Yeah.
true. Yeah, the commute is the number one
Yeah.
factor supporting remote work, I
Yeah.
think. And all studies have shown that that's the most onerous. And having lived in Dallas
Mm.
for a few years recently, and I had a 5-minute commute from my apartment to where I was working, and I drove right over the Dallas North Freeway. And in the morning and in the afternoon, it was always bumper to bumper, no matter what time. There was a 2-hour period each time where you would just see people
Yeah.
crawl. And so I mean, I don't know who could put up
Yeah.
with that, frankly.
Right.
So that will continue to be a real negative factor associated with where people work. I mentioned, I think, to you when we first talked about doing this discussion, um, the Adam Newman's new concept called
Yeah.
flow, where he is somehow going to incorporate residential and office and other elements of activity in a closer proximity to each other. We still haven't seen anything
Yeah.
on that, but have seen some other projects which have emerged that are similar, where you have very, very attractive residential and also very nice office spaces in nearby buildings or even in connected buildings, almost like a mall with
Yeah.
residential, retail, and office, so that everybody could be together. It don't need to be that close, but if it's a 5 or 10 minute commute or a
Yeah.
walk or a bicycle ride, I think that's the most attractive for many, many people.
Yeah. So that concept, the flow concept, sounds like it's kind of further out. But so basically, I'm trying to frame it like the demand for the traditional company office is going down, but there's other things potentially increasing, like the flow idea, co-working spaces, more
Right.
flexible leases. Yeah. Do you think? What do you think about co-working? Do you think that's going to continue to grow? I mean, we had WeWork blow up, which was the biggest one in the industry. Um,
Right.
do you think that will grow in demand? Those will gobble up some of the spaces after prices go down. What do you think about that piece of it?
Well, I mean, I think the whole concept of flex and co-working uh, has its attractive elements to
Hmm.
it. And I think, and I know many people, particularly in Europe, who go to various co-working places pretty much routinely, for coffee, or they meet
Yeah,
people and they just move around that way. They're not working in an office per se. So I think that maybe it's more prevalent
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Um, I remember looking at early videos coming out of WeWork, and you had Adam Newman on the stage, and then they panned the audience, and it was all these people in T-shirts, and they looked, coming from a more traditional banking environment, then into real estate,
hmm,
at a CBRE level. That wasn't the crowd that I saw every day in offices that I went
yeah,
to. I saw people who were, better dressed, who were more professional looking. I didn't see those in Adam Newman's video. So I'm not, I don't know really what, I guess I didn't spend enough time in WeWork when it was still
yeah,
viable to really understand the concept of co-working, where people were coming together and sitting at various tables nearby. I think that's okay, but I think from an organizational perspective, I suspect that most traditional organizations would want dedicated space within um, the co-working structure, and there's a lot of
yeah,
that's out
yep,
there now, and that's a growth element. So it's the 500 square feet, 1,000 square feet, and then there's a bigger common element
yeah,
as well. So I see that would be probably more attractive long term.
yeah. I think that makes sense. So if all of this is there's all this pressure, downward pressure on the value of office space right now. What is what does the future of the central business district look like to you? And you've touched on that a little bit, but let's keep going. If you can see around the corner a
Well,
year, 5 years, even more.
sure. Okay. Well, I think again for the more traditional CBD distributed in the United States, not the Manhattan or
Yeah.
San Diego
Hmm.
area. Um, I, since most of those were residential deprived, I think we've seen a lot of increases in interest in growing residential in a CBD
Hmm.
environment. Uh, but here, right here in Cincinnati, we have 4 or 5 major projects where they're converting office buildings primarily into residential components, and some of the older buildings work really well for that. Not so much the newer ones, just given the size of the
Okay.
floors, but um, so we're going to see more residential. I think there have been efforts to try to get retail into the CBD areas. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. It's been a disaster
Mm.
here because people don't want to shop in the CBD part of our city
Yeah.
here. So I think you'll see more residential. Um, I do think that uh, the growth of business generally is going to be more distributed, and that's why work is distributed. People are going to spend more time not coming to a CBD. They're going to do it elsewhere. So I think it's more likely that we'll see working nodes and operational nodes of activity that will resemble CBDs. Maybe it's a smaller type of CBD, and there in a place where there were none, there might be 2 or 3
Yeah.
emerging. And there you'll see elements where people can get what they need for their daily lives and for their families. That's convenient and attractive and a pleasant place to work.
Yeah.
That's not attached to a hour and a half
Right.
commute.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest
I
factor.
think that is too. And I've gone to, I actually just posted about this today on LinkedIn, but I've been to like 20 co-working spaces around the US. And I ask where, where the members are coming from. Most 95% they all walk or bike or take the train a couple stops to get there. So everyone
Mhm.
is close by to the co-working space. So if there's like
Right.
I went to some in Austin, Texas, and if there's one on the south side of the city, it's not downtown, it's like on the south side of the city. No, only people that live south of that are going. No one from in the city or north of the city would ever go there. So it's all
Right. Well, that makes
to
sense.
your point. Yeah, it's the co-working thing actually pushes the distribution of the offices because they all go to wherever the people live.
And in your experience, what would you say the age ranges of the primary occupants of those spaces would be?
Younger, like late 20s to early 40s for the most part. It's like,
Right.
yeah, it's
Okay.
it's that, and then the other interesting thing is this was my post today. The like dingier, more basic, like maybe it's I don't know real estate well, but maybe it's the class B or C spaces, not the class A. Those ones are full.
Mhm.
And then the like beautiful WeWork style ones are almost completely empty when I go in. That could be anecdotal, but if you have to pay $600 a month to park or something, or at a really swanky downtown place, or your
Right.
company pays for you because you're a remote employee, pays for you a stipend to have a co-working membership at one of
Hmm.
these places, you don't have skin in the game, I was thinking. So like you don't go that much. So
Right.
you go one day a week or you go every other week. Whereas the like grungy sort of really simple low ceiling ones are pretty full. And I think those are maybe individuals paying themselves. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out the co-working thing.
You're probably right there. You are probably right. I mean, there's been a lot of press on this in terms of the cost of commuting,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just the gas in the car, which is was more severe in the last year or two than it is
Yeah.
now. But you'd have parking. You'd have instead of the um, go to your refrigerator and get something for lunch is the 10, 12, $15
Yep.
lunch 5 days a week or 4 days a week, whatever you
Yep.
go. So we add up all those, and plus you got to wear better clothes, generally speaking. Maybe the grungy ones, you just need a
Yeah.
t-shirt. But
Yeah.
um, if you add up all the costs in the traditional office environment, like a WeWork,
Hmm.
maybe you'd be spending $1,000 a month, and that's kind of
Oh
the
yeah.
average number.
Yeah.
Some lower, some higher, and that adds up. Particularly when people are earning salaries in the 50 to 100 thousand
Yeah.
dollar
That's
range. It's a very significant
yeah.
share of their income,
Yeah.
which is not deductible most likely.
Yeah. Let me ask you one last question, one last topic on hybrid work. you said it best at the beginning that there's no clear definition. That's part of the reason there's so much like so many different opinions because it's not clearly defined. So let's say the structured hybrid, like we want you in the office 3 days a week and you can work remotely 2 days a week. So structured hybrid, where do you think that's going? Do you think that's part of the future of the way we work, or is that a temporary phase we're in?
Well, I'm not a fan of structured hybrids just because I think it has too much office
Mm-hmm.
presence. And most of the work that knowledge workers do is heads down knowledge work, not collaboration. So you're not collaborating 60% of your
Yeah.
time. It's the collaboration is really the flip side of that for
Mm-hmm.
most. It's maybe 20, 30% of the time. So you're kind of out of whack with too much time in an office just because that's a traditional place to work. And, you don't want to go all the
Yep.
way. So, one of the things that it's a problem for many people is that we live in kind of a binary world. Computers are either X and O's, or you just have two choices. It's either here or there. It's either in the office or it's remote. But in reality, life is not like that, and hybrid is clearly not like that. And I call this quantum because there are thousands of ways in which you can bring together a hybrid organization, and it can be structured uniquely within the same organization for multiple business units, multiple jobs. There are some jobs where you might want to have someone sitting at a desk 4 days a week, and there are other jobs where if you saw the person once a month, that's probably okay too. So is that easy to communicate? Either in a news article or in a process or a guideline or a employee manual? That's really hard to convey, frankly, and that's why probably it's avoided because it's not simple. Quantum is that simple, but it is where I think we're headed, and that is that we're going to adapt the workplaces for individuals that allow them to be the most productive at the lowest cost and to have a good experience doing the work.
Right.
That's where the organization is going to get the maximum benefit. The organization is going to realize that it's not just people sitting in a room 3 full days a week that's going to make them better, more profitable, and have people want to work there. So that explosion of alternative forms of hybrid and more discrete ways of doing things that don't follow a rule that GM put in place, 30 years ago. I think that's where we're headed. And that's going to mean a lot more variation, a lot more excitement in work, and a lot more new ideas that are going to be better as time goes on. And how that relates to, existing physical structures that are going to have a life of 100 years and can't be moved, that's kind of an unfortunate reality.
Right.
It is an unfortunate event, really, certainly for a lot of real estate owners, but it is something that we'll be looking back at these towers in the years to come, and you're going to say, why? What did they do in those towers? But it's part of our history now.
Yeah. Francis, I really appreciate you coming on to talk to me today. If people wanted to connect with you, where would you send them?
Well, I'd send them. LinkedIn is a good place. And I do have a number of followers and connections, and I'm happy to talk to anybody that wants to do that. You can also email me at an email, and I'll just say that we should probably have a little caption there, but it's fran, fran.saele, S-A-E-L-E, at mortevita.com. That's MORTEVITA. And I'll get that in my email.
Great. So I'll include links to that, and I appreciate you coming on.